And do we do the pledge in this normally or?
We should.
We should.
We should, yeah.
Yes.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for being here, and I would like our committee to introduce themselves as we go along. And if you have any conflicts of interest, to let us know what those are. And after that, we will call for a nomination for the budget chairperson. So let's start down here.
Paul Langner, retired with Rayonier, have no conflicts.
Okay.
Dan Garrison, an acting CPA, and I don't believe I have any conflicts.
Bob Gadati, I do not have any conflicts.
Nick Sorber, no conflicts that I know of.
Should be no conflicts.
Nancy Ward, no conflicts.
Rachel Barry, district resident, budget committee member, no conflicts to declare.
Thank you very much. And at this point, I would like to have somebody nominate a call for the nomination of a budget chairperson.
I would like to nominate Bob Gadati.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any questions? We'll move to a vote. All in favor of having Bob Gadati serve as the chair of the budget committee?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Mr. Gadati.
Thank you.
Opposed, obviously. Okay, so with that.
Thank you.
Rob.
Good morning. Today we will be getting, receiving the budget message from the executive director, Sean Clark, and the executive finance manager, Guy Glenn. So with that, I'll ask Sean Clark to give us his executive director message.
Morning, commissioners, budget committee members, thank you for serving. Thank you for your continued leadership, commissioners. I'm not going to read through my whole entire budget message. We can get to the meat and potatoes with Guy, but suffice to say that it's been a little bit of a challenging year. While we have been able to complete a few of our capital improvement projects that have been on our long time list, including some of the improvements down at the Scappoose Bay Marina, as well as the airport. We've leveraged state and federal grant funding for both of those projects, which you'll see as the theme as we propose what we have coming to you with the tax at the full rate of 8.86 cents per thousand. What I would recommend as a staff, as the staff to the budget committee and the commission, is that we would dedicate those funds from the tax specifically for grant matches where we can leverage and increase our spending by 50 to 90%, 90% being the extreme with the FAA grants. But we've seen some other places where, you know, we get half of our money plus half of OSMB's money for the improvements down there at the marina, for example. Some of the property purchases with FAA were 90-10, not quite that steep for the generator project, but again, leveraging those FAA or state and federal grants to get those projects done. So that's what I would propose that we use the tax for, should you choose to impose it this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Guy to get right into it.
Well, good morning,
Commissioners and budget committee members, as you know, Guy Glenn, Executive Finance Minister, and so we put a lot of work into our budget process this year, starting back in November internally. Staff, and then had a couple of meetings, where we shared both capital and operating budget related items with you guys during commission meetings, and so hopefully you've got some background and understanding of it. So if there's any, I might go over things high level, just knowing that you might have a little more understanding of the topic. So don't hesitate to interrupt me if there's any questions. Slide. And just thank you for taking the time to participate in this process, especially our committee members for engaging on that plan by the commission, representing the community as well. We do have another budget meeting scheduled for May 13th. We may or may not need that depending on how things go today. Hopefully we can go through the proposed budget, and then this, in terms of process, this would go forward to the June meeting. We have a public hearing and then adoption of the budget and whether we collect the port tax or not. So there will be a commission meeting in between this meeting and the June meeting, so there could be potential for discussion during that commission meeting or public comment as well. So just a few words and phrases before we begin and get into the numbers. But budgeting is not a zero-sum game. We want to look beyond winners and losers and think of ourselves as decision architects, our navigators, as we build and move forward into the future. So I just encourage you to think broadly and consider a wider set of options. Maybe it's easy to get into the details, but this is a good time just to think big picture, long-term direction, strategy. There can be a lot of complexity to consider, but where are the trends and what direction are we going? And then we just want to align the budget with our strategic business plan. So a lot of my process this whole budget period has been, reflecting on our strategic business plan, looking at our priorities there and trying to align this budget with our strategic business plan. So and I just ask, can this be a turning point? Not saying that we're going in the right or wrong direction, but where do we need to turn? Why do we need to make adjustments? It's a good time to think about those things right now. So move on to the next slide. Again, so where are we headed? And this is a chart of the Columbia River and St. Helens and Scappoose Bay there, but just think of ourselves as what direction we're headed again. And I tend to look at the budget and finances as a kind of a probability, looking at a probability statement more or less. Some of you may be more numbers oriented on statistics, but how are we going to improve the odds of because the future is unknown. So how do we prevent downside of this? How do we look at opportunities? How do we build for the future with revenue growth and stability and just general risk overall with revenue and continuity. So just want to challenge your assumptions and perspective, and I don't need to give you any more of a cheerleading story, but this is just a really good chance to talk about our future and priorities and plan with our strategic plan. So just be aware that a lot of decisions come from our emotions, and we have to, I have to acknowledge that, but when we look at the numbers, let's remember to reflect on the numbers and try to keep our emotions, then check our confirmation bias and disbelieving something, and trying to get that out of the numbers that we see. That's something even I have to work on, you know, just look at it objectively, but we've got a lot to accomplish in the next 10+ years. There's at least $60 million of projects that need to be completed. We can do that, you know, we don't have that kind of money, but you know, we have to figure out a way to do it. I mean, there's no way around it, and that's gonna take some tough and you know, bold decisions to do that. So I'll just quote by Senator Merkley, our Oregon senator, he said, "But budgets are nothing if not statements of priorities." And so it's kind of a good place to start. What are our priorities and our strategic business plan? So next slide. Just briefly go through each strategy of our budget plan here. And so first strategy is to maintain financial reserve policy target guidelines. And so always want to talk about reserves. Go ahead, Krista. Second one is to maintain an operating reserve. This says of at least 90 days operating revenues that cover project operating maintenance expenses. Go ahead. Third one is to have long-term capital projections and priorities for those projects, considering government mandates and positive cash flow to the port. Some of those things. So, and then just continue to revise and maintain our fixed asset thresholds based on capital projects. And then continue to develop ongoing financing plan for prudent utilization and leverage of the port's access, assets, and capacity. Got one more. It's not in there. And then we just need to continue looking at providing a diverse and stable stream of operating revenues generated through ongoing investment. So I think it's healthy to run through those, you know, as we head into the budget process now. So go ahead, Krista. And just getting back to that first strategy, there is our financial reserves. We've talked about this a lot. I know you don't need to go through it a bunch, but we just want to set aside funds for emergency and unforeseen events, similar to insurance. And then another part of reserves is kind of treating it as a savings account, putting it aside for future projects and strategic investments. So, and then just a quote by Warren Buffett, he said, "Someone sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago." So that's something we got to think about. Where are we planting seeds for future generations? So things take time to grow, and it's always good to remind there's a long time horizon on some of these projects. So. Okay, this slide.
Briefly introduce yourself and whether you have
Hi, everybody.
interest
Any conflicts of interest?
in your name.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rachel Armitage. I'm a budget committee member.
Yes.
Got held up by Public Works. They're digging a hole in the road and didn't let me through, so I apologize.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for So this slide represents our resources. And we're projecting a beginning balance of 13.65 million as of July 1st. And project to bring in about 9.46 million in revenue during the fiscal year. Rents, revenue from rents, reimbursements, grants, services, licensing permits make about 85% of our operating cash flows. And then we're budgeting about 10% in non-operating revenue from a combination of interest income and property tax. Rate taxes collected. Next slide. This chart represents a visual distribution of our resources collected. Each of the categories fall under certain lines of business that have their own specific operating costs. We'll be looking at expenditures later on in this presentation. Much of this revenue generated is directly tied to part infrastructure or port assets that require ongoing maintenance, replacement, or modernization. Investing in our infrastructure is a key component of my budget message. So it's critical for us to think strategically and better position the port to leverage locally generated funds with external sources of funding like grants or low interest loans. This is a pie graph of our resources. The right side of this pie chart represents our projected beginning balance, which is 59.1% approximately of our total resources for 13.7 million, which is significant. But further explanation is needed. Approximately 7.7 million of the beginning balance be broken down into designated funds for Open Talbot, Railroad Avenue, Port Westford, Beaver Dock, and operating reserves. Additional 4.6 million should be designated for long-term strategic investments. We are projecting our cash position to decrease by about 1.4 million in FY26, which is about 40% of our total capital outlay. It's imperative for the port to replenish and add reserves each year. Right now, we're challenged to do that from our operating budget. We don't have surplus to replenish our reserves each year. I just ask, how much should our reserve fund target be? Given those 60 million in projects roughly that we've identified before inflation, what do you think? 20 million more? Are we going to get 20 million? Question. That would be factoring in if we had a 30% match or something like that, you know, could average up to 60 million. So just theoretical kind of general numbers there to consider. Next slide. This is a slide I've shown before on our net position. And this is at the end of each fiscal year, starting back in 2019 through 2024. And this relates to the port's assets and liabilities. And on the left side are the port's net position in blue bars, and the numbers on the right side of the port's environmental remediation obligation for the Pope and Talbot site. That's the orange line there. You can see that the port's net position has been flat, slightly declining from 2019 to 2022. In 2023, the port was required to book liability related to a ROD, record of decision, on the environmental cleanup required at Pope and Talbot site. That was initially 19.6 million, and that's been increased to 22.1 million. And these are real numbers that are affecting our financial position and there's long-term implications for that. So we need to have forward thinking to be how we're going to address that site remediation there. And there's, as you know, things going on with that now, but it's a large part of our budget that we need to set aside funds for We do have some funds from insurance, roughly two and a half million, over $2 million in insurance funds we've received, but that's a pretty big gap between 2 million and 22 million, and so we've got work. So our last commission meeting, I provided some background on how ports in the region utilize non-operating revenue from taxes. Plain and simple, ports rely on tax revenue for a variety of reasons to achieve their mission of economic development. None of us take taxing lightly. We are all taxpayers ourselves. In my role, I must advise you that we are not in a financial position to forego collecting tax revenue. We are compromising our ability to complete projects and provide stability. If and when the port is in a better financial position, projects are being completed, the issue can certainly be reconsidered. It's short-sighted not to collect and allocate tax revenue towards priority capital projects, which I will present shortly. This pie graph separates out operating revenue from each of our sites. That's where the terminal brings in the most operating revenue, followed by the airport and followed on the industrial park. Revenue from our marine terminals, industrial parks, including the industrial activity at Scottsdale Airport, represents all but 12% of our operating revenue. Recreational facilities at the Scottsdale Bay Marine Park represent about 12% of our budgeted revenue. We will be doing a deeper dive into the marina RV park operations going into this fiscal year to address the issues raised in the recent study completed by BSD Associates. Now, this chart is reflective of actual cash received during the fiscal year for each site. I have conservatively not included deferred revenue, which is still due and payable. This pie graph represents requirements or expenditures. More detail can be found in the FY25 proposed budget document. Outflows are essentially spread between personnel, services, materials, and services, and capital outlay. Our debt service is 1.7% of the budget. The remainder is considered contingency, otherwise known as reserves, as we've already talked about. A little bit on each one of those sections, drilling down into personnel services. We're not budgeting for any new positions, planning on maintaining 19. We provide a range of 2.5% to 2.8% on the cost of living adjustment, which is in line with April CPI data. PERS rates are increasing by 3.86%. And health insurance, the estimate we're working with now represents a 13% increase. We didn't make a change. The plan we were on is going to be closer to 30% increase. So healthcare costs are a huge part of our budget, but very important for our staff. And last year we did do a different plan with the higher deductible with the HRA to help reduce our health insurance expense. So now a little bit on materials and services. These are just some areas I'm highlighting. It's about 16.6% of our expenditures overall. And these are highlights as compared to our FY25 budget. So on legal services, we've budgeted historically a lot more than we are now that we have Salisbury on staff. That's a lot of that paperwork is being absorbed by Bob, of course. He does a great job. So that's a large reduction there. On insurance, excuse me, should be advertising and promotion is, we're cutting back a little bit there again, trying to be effective with our funds. Insurance, if you look, compared FY 25 to FY 26, it only shows a 4% increase, but we budgeted a little bit high for FY 25 because we changed our deductible on the plan going into FY 25, and we actually only had a smaller increase than budgeted, so that's why you see a big variation there in the insurance funding on when you get into details of the budget, but we should be on target. There was only a 4% increase. It'll probably be less than that, but insurance is a huge ticket item for us. 492,000 with budgeted last year. It's only 404. So anyway, that's something I'll keep our eye on with rising insurance costs. Repairs and maintenance, that's gone up, doing some major maintenance on projects, and I identified that in last presentation. We can go over that in more detail if you'd like. Registration dues, fees, and travel, we've looked at ways to cut back on some expenses there with some dues that we're going on in certain organizations where we're not as involved, like strategic on travel and meetings and all that stuff. So it's an important part of operating the port for us to be out and about in the region and doing that kind of work, that is trying to be mindful of our expenses there. And then there's some planned projects that do have permitting involved. It's gone up 25,000, it's a 71% increase. But it's nice to have a real dollar amount there too, and not just a percentage. But slide. Here's just an overview on capital. It's 15.2% of our budget. We're budgeting on 8 sites. These amounts only reflect the port cash required, not the total project cost. So I thought that would be important to note. But on Columbia City, we're looking at the Clearwater dock as one of the primary projects there, and then I'm going to be doing some site readiness, engineering and permitting. Elm Creek roof assessment replacement and allowance for Elm Creek. Then on Multnomah also some roof work, and then shop building improvements. This is the new shop building circle. So and then at Port Westworth, got 2 projects there. The Beaver Dock seismic work on phase 1 there, and then the substructure walkway. Oakman Talbot site would be action area 1. That's 500,000 estimate there. We don't know exactly what all that project's going to entail, but we're putting 500,000 towards it. The Scappoose Airport, there's some Bay and ODA projects still in play there. We've got a big project coming up on the runway. We have or whatever, it's $3+ million, but that some of it may be in 26, but it most likely will be in 27, just depending on where the payout falls. That work has to be done in the summer. So, and then just on general admin and operations, we're looking at an all-train and then some improvements on our accounting software and generally here in the office. So next slide. So this pie graph represents expenditures by department, which includes personnel, materials and services, and capital outlay. So facilities and property management and terminal services all include maintenance and repair items, in addition to capital outlay and personnel expenditures. The non-departmental is essentially our contingency reserve. So breakdown of expenditures there by department. All right. I'll briefly go through our capital projects, 26. This is one slide, and then there's that slide, there's two slides on this. Our total capital budget is approximately 3.51 million. Again, this just represents the work cash required to complete the projects. We've identified 2.7 million in grant funding. So the total of the work projects is about 6.21 million, but just going through these projects by site, there's nothing planned for Clatskanie Builders. Or, excuse me, business center, someone says builders. But CBC, nothing there. Columbia City, and that their water dock, technology. Mountain Creek, on the industrial park, I went through these before talking, but there's actual numbers on the slide. And Port Westward is one of our larger projects with the Beaver Dock side of it. And there's a contingency and Connect Oregon grant, 2.7 million that's been secured. And then the substructure walkway, and we're not 100% sure on that substructure walkway. Yeah, but that's what we're allocating towards it right now. So Hope and Talbot, as I mentioned, on Action Area 1. And nothing at the these things are under capital rates, operating maintenance type expenses there, and that's included in the departmental budget. So Scappoose Airport, we have put an amount in there for the Arch FAA funded grant. That's roughly 10%. It'll actually be less than that because we'll have some ODAF funding to apply to that as well. But it's going to be a big project coming up in later FY26 or FY27. It sounds like. And just the numbers are on the software. So again, that the 3.51 million in cash, 1.7 million in grants, the total capital investment of 6.21 million. Just a brief overview of our debt service here. I mean, it's relatively stable. We haven't added any new loans in FY25. The debt service requirements are estimated to decrease by about 87,000 from FY25 to FY26. So these are all business Oregon loans with interest rates ranging from 3.3 to 3.96%, and most of them are spread out over a longer term, so that makes the payments more manageable. So slide. I'll just go through some key messages, and then I'm sure you might have some questions for me. If not, but it's fine too. But here to answer questions if you have. But key messages. So again, as Sean mentioned, as I've mentioned a number of times in the past few months here, is we just need to think long-term on strategic investments and asset preservation. So the existing assets we have, we need to make sure and maintain, take care of them. And then just look at long-term strategically where we're going to allocate our cash and how we're going to get grant funding and any other external sources of funding. Need to keep in mind that environmental remediation at Pope and Talbot, that's a big ticket item. And we can't forget about it. So $22 million on our balance sheet right now. Go ahead. And just ongoing, just need to keep reminding that's how important it is to increase our operating revenue. So projects that we invest in should either maintain or increase our operating revenue. We can't afford just to grow by CPI increases each year on our revenue from leases and permits and all that. We've got to add new sources. We need to increase our operating revenue capacity. And then we need, like I mentioned, the non-operating revenue to help provide for grant funding matches and other types of external funding if we do get business ordering loans or whatever. We need to be able to put our own money into it, have liquidity. That comes from both our property tax that's budgeted and also interest income. I will note that interest income is greatly gone up over the past few years between interest rates rising on savings or deposit rates. And then also from our balances increasing due to insurance funds received. You know, other funds that are not recurring type funds. So our balances have gone up, so we have a higher interest rate on a higher balance. So I think I'm projecting we're gonna end up with about 700,000 in interest income in FY 25. And 3 years ago, I think it was like under 300,000. So, you know, we can't be fooled by an extra 400,000 in interest revenue because as balances come down, as interest rates. Anyone's guess on interest rates with the way things are going now, but I mean, we can't count on that interest rate being as high on a term. And so that interest income is going to decrease most likely going forward. I think we just need to remind ourselves that we need to be continuing on the public service we provide to the with the Scotty's Bay Marine Park and the airport. As we know from the BSD study that the marine is being subsidized, and we've got to close that gap on revenue and expenses. That's something we'll be doing a deep dive in as staff, and then also reaching out to the advisory group for the marine you or input there over this next year. But we need to be able to continue providing this facilities and services and figure out a way to do that. The airport itself, just from the hangars and everything, does pretty well, but it also is a public service for pilots from around the region, in addition to ones that are home based and Scout booths here. So anyway, that's basically the extent of my presentation. Nothing too hopefully novel, you know. It's we've talked about a lot of this stuff before. There's details in the budget that can be talked about, but I just opening up what is next on the agenda.
At this point, are there any comments from the public? You can come forward and state your name and question.
Yes, my name is Rainey Nolan, and I've listened here today and I'm kind of concerned. What I'm kind of concerned about is kicking the can down the road. And kicking the can down the road with extending loans out that we have, and debts not only our future, but generations after us. And we don't want to get to a situation where that happens. So my second question is, what measures are being taken to retrieve your accounts receivable? Is there an ongoing thing? Are there accounts receivable out there that are just sitting and not being acted upon to bring that money back in, pay some of this debt down? Because I've been in finance for over 40 years. And I know when you kick the can down the road, there's some price that you have to pay. So we need to have a control of our accounts receivable and maximize that so that we have those operating funds to pay them off and not rely on loans or levies to the general public. So would anybody care to give me an answer on that? I mean, I don't know. This is my first meeting and I'd like to know.
No, it's a good comment. It's a thoughtful comment. Guy, do you want to talk about? we sort of have two account receivable pools in general. But I mean, one large one and one a series of smaller. Yeah. You want to describe kind of where we're at?
Sure, yeah, no, and I completely understand where you're coming from and very wise that you bring up, you know, indebtedness and then, collecting on accounts receivable, so. The first thing I would say on the port's liabilities with our debt service, I think we have actually a pretty low amount of debt for a public agency. And all those bonds are at very low interest rates and they're planned, have been planned into the budget for years, so. I don't think there's anything alarming there, it's just something we have to manage, you know, and most public agencies do carry debt to spread costs out on long-term infrastructure. Instead of paying for it all up front, spreading costs out over a period of time, so that's something I think is very manageable. But if we are in a position to pay down or pay off those loans, we can definitely get that, but we're not in that position now. And it probably wouldn't behoove us strategically to pay down those low interest rate loans if we're getting over 4.5% on our deposit accounts and we're only paying 3.5% on our interest for better carrying that cash in our accounts. But on the AR accounts receivable, that's something we always have to manage. And overall, I think the port's doing a great job with our tenants. Everyone runs into challenges over the course of what their business is. We've worked with some tenants just recently, working out their leases and restructuring things so that we're in a good position there and heading in the right direction. We do have a larger accounts receivable that we're also aware of and you know, just in process of managing that, and it's all still due and payable, you know, plus late fees. But it's interesting to see that project come to fruition, and yeah, you know, I that's a policy and a decision that Board Commission has made that I also agree with, and I think we're managing that AR as best as we can given the situation, and you know, it could pay dividends for us in the future. It's just that time frame there to allow things to continue to mature, and I think we'll move through that, and if not, we'll have to address someone's time. I don't know if I answered the question.
So what I'm hearing is that you're actually pursuing collection, yes, you're setting them up on payments and monitoring them so that they can complete that, so that they're not putting these levies out there to the public, you know, to raise money. Because we're essentially bankrolling where it is that owes us a debt. I mean, you know, if we can't do that and stay aggressively moving forward when we're not getting that money forward. So that's why I was inquiring about whether or not they were actually seeking collections on that.
Everyone's paying on as a group, basically, the agreements that have been worked out, so we're working with all tenants on agreements we've made, so.
Well, let's be clear, though. Are you aware of are you aware of the next project, next renewable energy down at Fort Western?
I've heard a little bit about it, which is why I came today, because I had no idea what this all entailed. And so this is my first meeting, so I'm kind of, but this happened to stick out to me.
Right.
Because in order to have a small business, you've got to keep a very tight control on your account receivables. And you also have to keep a tight control on your accounts payables. So it kind of brought that question forward. What actions being taken Are they putting them in collection agencies? Are they having individual business sites and sit down with the chief executive officers or whoever it may be to get a definite game plan going so that they have a continuous amount of revenue that they can count on each and every month from this lot over here that owes us money? Or is it sporadic? Because that's going to make a big difference in the budget when you have to plan. Whether you know you have that stream coming in or you have it kind of intermittent. So that's why I asked that question.
Well, in this particular instance, for this project, not for others, where we do have a payment plan in place, we are monitoring it well. With the next project, we have agreed to wait until the project is shovel ready at some point in the future, hopefully next year. But in the meantime, we have reduced our receivables from them from $108,000 a month to $15,000 a month. It's huge. It's a huge delta.
Yes.
And for that, we are just simply waiting. You're welcome. Thank you so much. Very thoughtful question.
Anybody else from the public that has a comment? Okay, how about discussions among the committee? What are your questions?
I hate that I have to ask this question. So also can't believe I have to ask this question. So the line item where we have federal and state grants, is that 2,700,000 already in the door?
It's a Connect Oregon grant, so
Okay.
currently for us, that's not federal.
No, okay, so the,
The federal grant are paid.
yeah, it's federal grant.
I think it's in the pool there because we were expecting more grant funding from a federal protect grant. I'm not sure exactly which one you're looking at.
That could be a mistake on my part too.
Oh, okay, so the 2,700,000 is really, is the state grant for 25, okay.
Sorry.
And we're pretty confident that those dollars are gonna come through the door. Again, I cannot, it's a weird question, but we're pretty
We have a
confident.
signed grant agreement. That's the best we can answer right now, but the state grants so far have not had the same pressures
Right.
that we've experienced. So.
Okay, great. Second question, with concerns around tariffs, and obviously you mentioned interest rates. I know we have contingency for long-term projects, but could you explain a little bit kind of what the plan is in sort of the worst case scenario if materials aren't coming through the door or cost increase? Is there, how does the budget account for that scenario?
One real quick comment on tariffs. Luckily, I say for us, I only mean luckily because we don't have commodities that are exporting right now. As it relates to tenants that are actually relying on imports for their business, we'll have to wait and see. But for us, you know, it's not our renewable diesel, for example, that's transiting out of Port Westward. It stays domestically, so there's no tariff issue there. Should Next come on board, that could definitely be a concern for tariffs, as some of their inputs are coming from across the pond, you know, overseas. So, but that's a problem for another fiscal year, I believe.
Okay.
Just on the tariffs, so unless they affect our tenants directly who are importing and or exporting, we will have to wait and see how some of those shake out.
Okay, I'm a little concerned about that, and then just how those policies might affect other, you know, miscellaneous supplies that we rely on to do our business. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
That question, Rachel, I'm sorry.
No, that was my whole question. Like, just what are you thinking about? How are you thinking about this?
And the guy's earlier point about a budget, you know, it's either fluid, right? So if something happens in a budget year, drastic, that we have to come back, we can come back and adjust some things if they're significant.
Okay.
I would just further say that a lot of Fortune 500 companies now are even pausing and not giving guidance on, because there's so many uncertainties
Mm-hmm.
there. And so, you know, we're doing our best to make that, you know, educated assumption on where things are going in the next 12 months. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I've got to talk. The $60 million project. Just because you can do a project doesn't mean you should do a project. That's a lot of money to put into something, and I don't see where revenue's gonna be. We can try it. That there's, it's been addressed to my satisfaction.
I would just say that and I can drill down into that a little bit more, but that's a combination of projects. Now I include the Pope and Talbot $22 million Port Westward, I believe is.
The full list was that much by itself.
Well, depends on how many phases you want to include. And but you know, I've just conservative over 10 years saying if Open Talbot was down, and that's only phase one of Open Talbot's. And it's excuse me. No, that would be right now, that's the whole remediation process on phase one. But then there's also Fort Westward, there's other projects. I know that's kind of not a very concrete figure, but it's in that range.
Mr. Gerson, if I could add, as you've known over the years, Port Westward has been our biggest revenue generator for the board. Currently, we dipped below 30% the first time in quite a while. However, the investments that we do out there will definitely generate revenue should the facility continue to be used. And there is capacity down there for additional revenue, additional traffic, cargo. So maintaining that important asset will keep us able to use that revenue generating dock and the land adjacent to it. Reason was another thing we haven't even talked about. It's speculative at this point because it's not a certain thing, but should that rezone go through, we would then be looking at potentially more users of that dock, because anything that happens in the rezone has to be tied to the dock, has to use it for import or export. So the idea is to, the more users of that dock, the more revenue that the port can get. Obviously, there's capacity issues there with days, but we're working to maintain the assets so we can continue to use it as a cash cow.
That hasn't been clear on it. It sounded more like it was a maintenance project and wasn't gonna do anything on that, so. For revenue on the revenue. On that. I know it's nitpicky, but that's what I do is nitpick on that. On the graph on page 8 shows Marina an RV revenue of $553,000. I can't find that number anyplace.
That's the figure he's looking at on page 8.
Yeah, on the detailed schedule for. I'm sorry, I seem to have lost.
Page 12.
Page 8 shows 553.
Yeah, page 12, on page 12 on there for revenue for the Marine RV Park, it's got $262,500 on it. So there's $300,000.
Yeah.
Where's that coming from?
I should probably clarify that better. There's the way it's broken down and some of the permits and fees and stuff, it'll go into I can show you better with my, on paper here, but it just splits it up differently between the charts and the graph. And so, I thought what would be nice is to, align those categories for the marine and RV park, because there's different kinds of revenue that come in through there between, mortgage fees and parking fees, RV park fees. They're kind of split out differently, so.
Seems like those two should connect somehow.
Yeah, if I took, like, I'm back to K-12, you took like the slip rentals, 248,000 added in.
the 42, 641 on the marine park. And then the
The 262 is not accounting for the launch fees
No.
and the tenant.
It should all be together.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
It should demonstrate. Those were my primary concerns.
Thank you for that question.
Anybody else have questions? Yes, Paul.
Mr. Chair, a couple questions, and I know, I hope these are not just placekeepers, but I look under the department details, professional services, prices, expenditures seem to be going up some substantially. And I noticed that like the executive travel is going down. I mean, good manage there. I know it's again, a spitball type situation, but I'm looking at some of the professional services numbers that seem to be just a little higher than going down the pike forward. Like the finance administration from 85,000, proposed 85,000 this year to 115,000 this year. There's a $30,000 increase. Which leads me to ask, what's going on? What in professional services and admin, what do you see going forward that's going to be for the 30,000?
Most of that is from IT related, services with our security cameras. We're bringing the server in-house, which will actually save us some money, but it'll have an upfront cost there. But most of that is, IT, security services, all that's gone up in price over the years, so. We're doing, I guess, I'm not saying that we're not doing a good job managing those categories. And it's science, you know.
It sounds reasonable. I mean, same thing with terminal services, up to 85,000, 7,000 last year. Just, there's some big jumps in there that just. And then this is one I kind of railed on earlier, material handler. I just in the industry, go to Ritchie Brothers, the big auctioneer, the closest one in Chehalis, open it up. You won't find a material handler unless it's 40 years old and they held it in on the back with blackberries growing through it for $20,000.
We're just putting all options.
Yeah, if you needed one, you may want to lease one. Just saying that for 20,000, it's unrealistic. The other one, and I had another question on the Clearwater dock. I assume that's just basically the permitting and design work because 250,000 won't even put in dolphins. Or we won't even put in one dolphin, let alone.
That was a question I had as well, not to.
So that.
But I'm glad to see an investment down there because it is a jewel, underutilized fuel for the port.
Yeah, it needs to be more utilized actually, if we can somehow figure out how to do that.
And one of the questions I had was actually pertaining to the Clearwater dock and where those piles are going to be placed and what they're for, the additional piles.
We've got some maintenance to do, some piles that need replaced, so we're not necessarily, we might increase our capacity by having newer piles, but the goal isn't to upgrade it to get to ships, if that's the question. Will be maintained as a, barge loading facility.
Yeah, the question is, I went down there and looked at it. So I've just, if there's additional piles being added, I can understand, because then you'd have room for more storage for barges. And we can discuss it at a further length, but the piles that are there are in extremely good condition. The upper and lower, unless somebody hit one, which is a possibility. If you haven't noticed as of recent. Especially doing this marine work, and Paul, I'm sure you could comment on it. You can really go down a rabbit hole with money spending out here on the marine projects, because as you just stated, I mean, 250 grand will get somebody there, and then it's gonna be up from that, so. That's the only comment I have.
Mr. Chair, I have two other real quick questions. And it's been a while since I was associated with the airport. I know it sounds like it's a paving project. Is it possible, and I know with all the grants, federal grants, to prepay some of your oil costs for the paving? Only because I don't know what it's going to be like right now, but you're in a catbird seat right now. If you watch the price of sweet Tex oil crude this morning, took a big drop. If you could prepay, even if you don't know who the payer is going to be, prepay your oil right now, part of your grant, at 300,000, you may be able to double it. In between what it is, your asphalt cost today versus asphalt cost 2 years from now.
What a good suggestion.
Yep.
That's a good idea.
Good idea. That's good. I don't know if you can do it with the grant money. It sounded.
I'm curious as to the mechanics of that, Paul. If I could talk with you about how you think that would work as a public entity and how we do something like that. I thought we can explore that a bit.
Anybody else? The committee have questions?
So I have a question about the taxing, and I was new when we first voted to eliminate the tax, but I don't recall any in-depth discussion about matching grants. And all of a sudden now, matching grants is the big topic. Can you explain to me why it wasn't at that time? Why was that not a concern at the time we eliminated the taxes?
That's a great question. So I think, I know at the time we were feeling pretty good about our financial position, having done some projects out of Oklahoma, and spent some insurance proceeds. And I remember Pat Trapp saying, don't get rid of the tax. You need it to preserve your bonding capacity should you need it. That was his stand on the open thing. And the grant thing, I think should always have been touted as a major win for us to use tax funding or otherwise, because just the way we are able to leverage it and get the, our match provides us to get more money, 50 to 90%, depending on the funding source. I'm not sure why we haven't talked about that, but at one point when Pat was still here, we had the intergovernmental partnership program, the IPP, where we used the tax money and held that aside for folks that wanted to apply for it in the port district that had mission aligned projects that they wanted to complete. That was one way we used it, essentially for becoming a grant resource for, although he was careful of it, not call it a grant. And that was investing money back into the community, hopefully, getting that money to expand. But I think for our purposes now, where we find ourselves having to basically, if we had a grant administrator solely dedicated to grant funding, they would easily pay for themselves. I'm certain of that. I guess a little uncertain with federal stuff, but there are a lot of rocks to turn over for grants, things that, either we just aren't in tune to because we don't look down those roads, but there's a lot of opportunity with the grants. I think that's where our money is really best flexed. If we're going to say to the public, we want your 8.86 cents per thousand, and we're going to grow that by what we use it for. If we say the commission decides that we want to just dedicate it for grant matches, and I would say another caveat would be commission approved direct revenue generation projects. So let's say we have the federal grants get on hold for this administration. I don't know, just worst case scenario. If we were able to still use that money into, I always use the example of a spec building at Multi. That's one of the main things that Amy responds to with Greater Portland referrals that people want. If you got a building, we'd like to start with 30,000 square feet and it's a plan. So oftentimes we're not even responding or responding, thanks, but no thanks, we can't help you unless you have money to bring to help build the building so that we can do this together, public private or something. So aside from public privates, which we can still use grant money for, we have some opportunity to spend some money on some revenue generation. I think we should reserve that right, if, you know, in addition to grant matches. That would be my recommendation.
And Nancy, I also go on to say that we've got the open talent site in Fort Westford. Those are two huge projects that, you know, when
We had those at the time, though. That's nothing new.
I think they've been identified,
Well,
you know,
I mean, we stopped levying the tax after Nick signed the contract. And so Nick's
Exactly.
exuberance that led us down that path.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for me, you know, philosophically, morally, politically, when I voted yes to do away with it, I just assumed that was it. We would never be bringing back the tax because it's very easy to give people perks, to give them advantages, really hard to take them away.
We're the perk. You gotta think of us as the perk. We're the economic engines here. We're trying to bring in tax-paying entities that wanna, induce some tax money into that.
That isn't the way people think.
Well, they should. I think we need to fix that. And that's why we're doing
Yes.
this campaign.
And
We're going out, we're gonna talk to folks.
I agree, and I agree that we need to do a lot of work. And we need to educate, and we need to listen, and we need to ask. And a year from now, I might be much more inclined to vote for it. Once I have a better understanding of how the people in the community will take this, and can we do a good enough job of educating them? That is our job. Yes, we are an economic driver. They need to know that, and they need to know how we're going to do it, and we need to have their buy-in. We need to have their support. To me, this is really important to have the support of the community. And I don't think we have done that. I don't think we've had enough time. And so therefore, I would prefer that we put this off until next year and we dedicate some serious time and commitment to this education process. Because as we know, this coming year is going to be financially a big question mark for everyone, including all the taxpayers. And while our tax is very, very small, it's still a tax. And I just think, I think it's a shame that we kind of came up on this within the last few months. This has not been something we've been talking about for a year. And all of a sudden, this becomes a really huge issue. And I think moving quickly, obviously, is what everyone wants to do. We need to know where we stand on our budget. But I just don't think we have done a sufficient job of educating the public and getting their input. It's my personal opinion.
I respectfully disagree with you to some extent there, Commissioner Ward. We've been doing important news and notes in the Spotlight paper the last several months, sharing that on our Facebook. Hopefully you folks on Facebook are sharing that when you get it. I mean, you guys are our mouthpieces as well, right? Our commission. So that's important for, you know, it's interesting that we would have to want to try and encourage folks to want to do our tax when we're not sure if our commission is going to approve it. So basically what we've done is put facts out there about what you're getting with your port investment to date. You know, the article on Holton Talbot, on the Beaver Dock and the Connect Oregon grants, and the things that Gina has helped put together to spread out there. And I've got a tour that I'm on right now, outreach tour. This Friday, I'm doing the Kiwanis. Tomorrow or next Wednesday, I'm doing a Rotary. And we already did this Scottish Economic Development Committee a couple weeks ago. Advisory Park Committee on Monday, May 6th, Columbia County Rotary, Wednesday, May 7th, Rainier Chamber, May 8th. Kiwanis Club, May 27th, Scappoose Advisory Committee, June 2nd, Cascade Chamber, June 5th. So we're we're hitting the streets, we're showing folks what their port's doing, and hopefully getting their support.
And I, yes, the chair, I have a comment
Sean would
too.
like in as well.
Pardon me?
Oh, there's Robert.
Good morning. I'd like a few words if I could.
Yes.
As the primary person driving the lack of use of the levy, when we decided not to levy it, we did not eliminate anything. We never made a vote to eliminate any kind of funding. We simply chose, as we're supposed to do each year, whether to assess a levy or not. We were doing well and decided not to. We fully anticipated that at some point there may be obligations. We knew about the dredging obligation. We had a pretty good idea about the Pope and Talbot obligation. We just chose to pass on to the taxpayers the fact that we were doing well. So there's no inconsistency here. The reason that that money comes up now for matching grants, it was I, for one, talked with Sean and said, that's the only way I will support levying that tax is to use it for some of the obligations we have to take care of, not for operating. So that's the history of that.
Rachel.
Thank you. Yeah, in the run up to this meeting, I went out and polled friends and neighbors and talked about the work of the port. And they were all, aside from one, very supportive of the tax. And they see it as a way for us to kind of take care of our own. A lot of folks kind of recognize that with the high degrees of uncertainty, that having something that we could control, they were willing to pay for it, and they kind of they absolutely recognize the value of the port and the economic engine that these properties are. And I had some really good conversations, and folks are supportive of the mission and the work, and we're fine to pay it. Less concerned about the purpose of the funds, more about the price point. And at that 0.0886, there was no concern.
Some of that may be their comfortability with the leadership. I mean, not trying to blow smoke or anything. They know who their electeds are, and maybe they have solace in that. That makes them feel good about the board.
Yeah, that theme of security and being able to do something internally and to provide stability for our community kept coming up.
Brian, you had a question?
I did not have any questions, but thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
on this, is my understanding that the port in working with DEQ are applying for federal funds for cleanup of Pope and Talbot, which is it's been over 30 years since the port took this on.
Yep.
Isn't it my understanding correct that you guys have to provide the port, we have to provide a statement of financial responsibility? And in that, we have to pledge not only the assets of the port, but the continual assets of the port, such as the tax levy. So if we take a position, if port takes a position, we're not ever going to collect these taxes again, or we're not going to collect them, does that jeopardize it? Because under the ORS 777, the port defaults back, and Columbia County then becomes the responsible party for agreements that have been made therein. I mean, I would like to see that there's a commitment there to move forward, just as a show of faith that, yes, we're going to move forward for state and federal grants.
Yes, we applied for an EPA grant that we're waiting with bated breath to see if that gets re-released. That was a $4 million for phase one, doing some permanent reactive barrier, about $4-ish million worth of work, 500,000 match, 400 to 500 from DEQ. But to your point, Mr. Langner, yes, they did have some issue with the fact that we are not currently imposing our tax. I can't remember exactly. Elliot, once you sure.
Elliot has some info.
So we have actually just recently sent an ability to pay to the DEQ in the hope of limiting our liability because of our financial situation to the proceeds of our insurance that are still in the process of reviewing it. I suspect the recent cyber attack that the DEQ experiences, laying things on that. But what they have indicated to us is they haven't responded to that, for lack of a better term, application yet. But they have told me they will hold it against us that we are not collecting the tax. They haven't specified what that means, but my interpretation, not theirs, was that they would treat it as that money was being received, whether it is or not. So in essence, that could increase our liability. And you saw the hit that took on the balance sheet. The auditors wrote it down. We're hoping if they do agree to limit our contribution to that cleanup, that would improve the balance sheet significantly.
So,
I understand it was your interpretation of it, Elliot, but would they go back and look at it at point of stop from collection till now, or would it be a year-to-year
They
situation?
haven't said how they do it. They just said it would be treated as if.
Understood. Thank you.
I only, and this is just an icing on this, 30 years ago, the total mitigation cost for Railroad Avenue was estimated at $4.5 million. And in 30 years, we've done nothing, or I shouldn't say we, nothing has occurred. And now it's into the $30 million range, and maybe, I mean, it's scary, the cost of delay and kicking the can down the road.
Yep. And now we're at the end where that is coming out.
Exactly
We're
right.
actually starting to mitigate, which is a good thing. But of course, as you point out, cost is escalated, plus the technology has changed so that maybe it's a little more robust now than it would have been 30 years ago.
But for 30 years, we've continued to leach more and more and more into the 30 years of letting pollution continue to leach into the waterway while we examined our navels. Thanks, Elliot. Thank you for answering the question.
I have a question. Last year, we had a really similar conversation about doing public community outreach around levy. What happened in that time? Because it feels like a very similar conversation. I did see the tour schedule and I like that, but it would be helpful, I guess, let me reframe this. It'd be helpful to have context about what happened between point A and point B.
Yeah, just continue to go out and highlight, what your port, what the community support's doing, and get the articles that we've written and shared. Speaking at Rotary, before, I mean, I've done Rotary, later last year, I think it was. I did a Qantas presentation already, talking about the port, just basically getting our face and name out there, our logo, and making sure people know. I mean, it wasn't going out and asking for the tax. It was more of a, here's what report, here's your report, here's what you get. This is a public asset. We've invested over $40 million over the past 12, 13 years, leveraged a lot of money from public and state and federal sources. So I think it's really the only way that we're going to thrive is to continue to leverage funds like that.
Yeah. And I think from my perspective, I totally agree with that. I guess my take on this would be that given to Paul's point, and also given the insecurity of the moment, I think I'm a community engagement professional. And so I'm never not going to be like, we shouldn't be engaging the community. And at the same time, I really feel like given the circumstances of the moment, given the high costs of deferred maintenance plus, I think this is maybe not the year to defer on collecting that revenue, especially because increasingly also, I think the grants piece is a really big factor that oftentimes public entities and private entities really do require, that additional revenue. So I definitely appreciate and understand Commissioner Ward's point. And if we were to do outreach, I would say, let's collect data, let's take feedback, let's do this, that, and the other thing. And I would, suggest that that feedback and data be presented to the board. But I also think, we're just in a particular moment in time and we're entrusted with taking care of these resources and facilitating this economic development. And it's just not a situation where I think we can wait another year. So that's my take.
Okay, is there any further comments?
Well, may I put you on the spot, Mr. Culpepper? Because I know that you're an echo chamber here and we're hearing all the reasons why. And I know that you have a different viewpoint and I'm really hoping you'll share that with us.
In all this speech, I don't think I've heard one word that really means anything to me of increasing the top line. In my opinion, right now, everyone in this, the employee of the port that's in the position should be out there recruiting customers to get the top line up. That's most important. And then people probably wouldn't care about this tax. And I've just heard this for years and years, the progress and what we're doing. And finally, the director here is out doing the outreach, which is only local. And it's, I think, maybe he and Ms. Bynum, and I don't know if that's your job right now, but it was. And you were the person on the lead there. I don't see any results. If we were a private company, there'd probably be heads rolling right now. And I could go on and on, but that's enough.
So how do you, are you saying that all of this leads you to say you would not support the reinstatement of the tax? Or are you saying that we have not done enough, but you understand that this is going to be necessary? Do you see it? Which is your viewpoint?
I don't see the tax as necessary. As a matter of fact, I was just out toward Camas Washougal. And I'm just amazed at what's out there. And they have no water business.
They have no water business.
No. You sit and think about it. Do they have?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Can they get the ship from Port Westward up there? Yeah, probably clear the bridge.
Okay.
I don't know what else to say.
Thank you.
Line needs to go up.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark has told me that over and over, if we get next, and I totally agree, that'll change things dramatically. But what if we don't get next? What's going to happen?
Great question. I can't disagree. We want to grow our top line. We want to grow our revenue. That's revenue generation is really where we have to get to. And if I would say that if, for example, the Columbia Commerce Center was filling up and we were missing out on some of that business, I would be like, wow, what the heck? But the reality is that folks have to want to come out to Columbia County. And I tell people all the time, even Scappoose is a 30-minute drive from Portland. You times that by 2, that's an hour. That's a truck driving an hour to come out to Scappoose to bring deliveries out, to go back to town. The capacity in the metro area is going to most likely be swallowed up before we ever see a significant piece of business, only because of that. The economics of fuel. Rouse was a truck driver. If a company had a chance to locate on Eon right there versus Scappoose, unless they lived out here and they wanted to enjoy our amenities and want to pay a little extra for costs, I mean, their costs are going to gonna be up just because of the location. That's one of the things, we're gonna have to sell that view out there from the airport. We have property developed on the airport, there's property surrounding it. And I really feel, again, once that first domino falls, it's either because of the result of somebody not wanting to either locate in the metro area, or just the capacity's not there. That's gonna be a good thing for all of us. That's the hope, and we're in economic development, so we are optimists. I feel like I got the right job because I'm an optimist, so I want that to yield something though, too, so. You're almost 4 in my tenure here, and you've had some small little wins here with some license agreements here and there. And we've invested in staff, right? We're poised to grow, and I just really feel like we're very close. And unfortunately, with the federal uncertainty right now, that kind of throws a little wrench in my optimism, but it doesn't deflate it by any stretch.
Can I ask another question? Can you just draw a quick summary line between some of these major investments and, you know, kind of how they would contribute to profitability in the long run? And then 2, what is the strategic plan to bring in more business to the board?
I invite you to read our strategic business plan. Yeah, it's a pretty good document. We've been relying quite heavily on that document since we got it completed. All the way from guys talking about the different strategies that he started with there in the beginning of his presentation. Yeah, I mean, if we get some grant money to build a building that then, you know, nets us, that we pay that off in 10 years, or I don't know, Elliot and Guy are kind of our return on investment guys, but yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a longer game, but you know, the idea is that not only do you get that business there, but you've got the tax base there for the folks that are working, paying their taxes to the county and the local municipalities and whatnot. That's just, it's a multiplier effect essentially.
Okay, any other comments? Concerns?
Randy?
I'm sort of listening to it, doing here, some of it as a taxpayer and some of it as an individual, just looking at things as a whole. And I'm kind of concerned that the budget is filled with what if we do this, or what if we do that? This will raise our tax money up, so we're including that in the budget. Well, the other side is, what if we don't get those fundings? And we're trying to sell a tax base, a plan, whatever you want to call it. It is based on what if. I think if we're going to sell it to the general public and get them in to embrace this, we need to use, this is what we have now. Well, here's a possibility on the future, but we're offering this right now on what we have now. It's solid and concrete. Because I don't know any retired citizen, I don't know any real businessman that would say, well, I could do this if my business did that, so I'm going to forecast that in my future. A lot of things happen. And I'm sure that was probably the situation with the tax. And so I'm a little skeptical if one of you came to me and said, oh, you know, here's this plan we have, you know, I want you to embrace this. And I can't. Because it's a nice plan, I gotta put it that way, but is it realistic to Fred Jones and Bob Smith and everybody else in this community? They gotta hang their hat on something that is not quite solid. If you can get my drift on that. It's the taxpayers overall that's gonna be paying for this should we get it wrong. And we already have businesses that can't get enough skilled labor. They're thinking of moving out of town. That's factored in this decision. That we may lose X amount of percentage of businesses based on what we have now as far as our schools and things of that nature that severely affect our businesses. Or maybe our rates are too high in some areas, like water and sewage. That's what I heard when we went to businesses. They're too high.
In St. Helens you're talking about, or,
Yes.
yeah.
I mean, you know, some of these things have to have some sort of factor in this. But we're gonna be left with one heck of a mess. And we've got some great ideas. You know, but like the gentleman here said, you know, 30 years ago, it was only 4 million and now it's going to 30 million. I mean, you know, what did we do in that period of time? You know, to avoid that 30 million, we just dumped on the taxpayer. And now you're gonna come to them and sell them on this plan. I mean, I don't know if I could buy into it.
Yeah.
The Pope and Talbot place is the big sort of iceberg. It was something, what was it, in the early 60s that the port took it on? And really not understanding any of the potential conflicts, environmental conflicts, issues that were there. I'm sure, or thought that something else could move into there. But people didn't look at that point in time in 1960. And it took a long time, and I came to it late in the process, but it took a long time to work through the insurance issues regarding the, you know, Pope and Talbot business itself, to find out what we were responsible for as a port and what Pope and Talbot could be responsible for. That took an extraordinarily long time. We actually had somebody on our commission that was able to probably develop a larger return from Pope and Talbot than we would have had otherwise if that person hadn't been on our commission at that point in time. So it's a tough deal, and the standards in terms of environmental cleanup have changed a lot over that period of time, and in changing, the costs are obviously going up as they are with everything, and it is. I think my personal opinion is I think we'll have some value with DEQ if we really work with them. And I think they feel like we need to be taking that. We need to give them the value of that tax as part of our match for what money they will provide going forward. Nothing's been written on that, but Elliot kind of gave us the notion that they're pretty serious about that, and it affects us. And so my view would be to levy the tax and put specifically towards that. That would be my view. But anyway,
And just a little bit of clarity on the Pope and Talbot site, when the port bought it, and then Pope and Talbot went bankrupt, they essentially left the public port holding the bag with the environmental cleanup, and luckily there was a little bit of insurance money. I say a little based on the total amount to clean up. I think we've, how much have we secured insurance so far? 2.5 mil, plus another potential almost four coming should we settle with another insurance company. That's obviously money that's parked and waiting to start turning dirt and make some tax out there. The other thing was it took a long time to get the feasibility study completed. And then when you saw that one graph where our net position dropped, that's when our auditors saw that we had to realize that obligation because the record of decision was written by the DEQ, which we could no longer ignore that liability. And that's why that huge drop on our net position shows there in 23 was. Which is unfortunate because that can also affect our potential for bonding ability if we wanted to get some loans for things. Unclear with how exactly that would affect us, but would not be positive.
It just seems unfortunate to me, this conversation wasn't had at the time we were making the decision to do away with the tax, because had I heard all this, I wouldn't have voted at the time to do away with it. Because it sounds as though in order for us to do what is from business sense, the logical and reasonable thing to protect the port in its future endeavors, we must always have this tax. Because when is this ever going to go away? This requirement for matches.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been duped. Like I was duped into voting for something that I didn't really, and I shouldn't say duped. I'm sorry, that's wrong. I did not do enough investigation at the time.
It was ignorance, and I don't mean that in a negative way. We didn't have the clear picture.
Right. And I don't think as, at that time, I was the
Right.
executive finance officer for the port. I don't think, my understanding was that the tax would never go away. The port commission has the ability to levy that as needed. And fortunately, we were doing good in those particular years where we had a good feeling about prospects, and I think that the commission felt that it could be not assessed for that particular year or years. We've had a few 4 years that I think it hasn't been assessed, but things change.
But was it because we didn't have grants coming up? Was that the reason? I mean, I can't imagine. We've always had grants.
Well, we've had grants to a certain degree, yes, but not to the degree.
Not to the
that we're
degree we are now.
Coming up now.
One of the things we've recently learned is these federal grants are a really heavy lift. You know, we solicited some help, outside help, some consultants to help us write some good grant packages. And it took a great amount of staff time to collect data and send things to them to help us come up with a good grant package. It's just, if you go around to some of the port industry events, association events, everybody's talking about rising costs. We're all facing the same thing. And I don't have to remind you guys that we're one of one of two in Oregon that are not assessing our tax, because we all are dealing with aging infrastructure, bills that are coming due that, just things in the water, they degrade over time, roofs degrade, you gotta maintain properties. So, we have 2,400 acres. That's a lot of maintenance to take care of. Some of it is, some bare ground, but we can't ignore it. We still have to mow fields. We have, we can't just let stuff go fallow. So they're kind of operating from a level playing field with our other port brethren, Sistren, just to be able to compete with them to some degree in a friendly way. Certain things we won't compete with other ports on, but just being able to take care of our infrastructure is what we really have to focus on over these next few years. So we don't have to deal with catastrophic things like roof collapses or things like that.
The discussions about levy that tax went on for several years on it. It didn't just happen on that normal year. And yeah, a lot of it was on it. I think that was due to COVID, on that economic turn down, on that people were on it. There was an attitude that no tax is a good tax. And I think that was a lot of the thought process, rather than what can we do this, what should we do, what's the most feasible thing to do. It was just no tax is a good tax.
Can we, just Robert again, I'm sorry, but if we want to hold a workshop on the history of the port levy, we can do that. And I'd love to do that because there's a lot of misinformation here, but can we get this meeting back on to the budget?
Yes. Okay.
Well,
Mr. Boston has some handout.
Yes. Brian?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, a lot of really good information, thoughtful questions and commentary. Really appreciate it. Wish I was able to be there in person. I did want to address one thing that I feel strongly about. I'm very much opposed to the notion that we would tax our citizens to clean up a industrial site that was left by a private corporation at the kind of pushing or shoving of the state of Oregon through DEQ. That's something that I am just completely opposed to. I'm more on the fence about everything else that we need to pay for, and definitely am interested to hear from the community as this recently started outreach campaign goes forward. Yeah, just to reiterate, firmly opposed to putting that burden on our taxpayers in regards to the DEQ cleanup.
Okay, let's kind of get this back on track here. I think we're at a point where I need to ask the committee if we are going to approve the budget as proposed. So is there a motion?
For clarification, because of the tax levy as part of that budget, can we? You can forward with it.
You could move forward with it because this is just the budget committee making the recommendation approval of the budget as it's presented. The final adoption of this budget comes in June, where the commission could, make that, they still can make that decision. If they're going to adopt a budget, they'll adopt a budget less having that tax in the budget.
Then I would so move to approve the budget as presented.
Okay.
There's been a motion and a second to approve the proposed budget for the 25-26 year at $23,108,209. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so carried. The next piece on this is the tax levy is included in this proposed budget. We would need a motion coming out of the budget committee to approve the tax levy for the 25-26 fiscal year.
I would move to reinstate the ports tax levy of 0.886% for the fiscal year 25 to 26.
Second.
Been a motion and a second to approve the tax levy for the fiscal year 25-26 at the 0.0886 level. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. There's two, okay. So carried. With that, I don't think that we need to have a second meeting for discussion on this, so I would ask for a motion to adjourn. A motion and a second to adjourn the budget committee meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? So carried. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate everybody's comments.
Thank you. We moved to adjourn.
But yeah, it's better than Boston.